In the early hours of November 8, 2018, a spark ignited in the brush-covered hills of Butte County, California. It was small at first, a flicker in the forest near the Feather River Canyon. But the land was dry, the winds were howling, and the air held the weight of something about to break. Within minutes, that spark transformed into a raging inferno. By the time the sun rose fully, the fire had a name, the Camp Fire, and it would soon become the deadliest and most destructive wildfire in California's history.
Nestled in the Sierra Nevada foothills was Paradise, a quiet town with pine-lined streets, family-owned shops, and a sense of small-town peace. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, where kids played in the yards and neighbors waved from their porches. But that morning, everything changed. At 6:30 a.m., residents saw a dark column of smoke rising to the east. By 7:30, flames were barreling toward the town. In a terrifying sprint, the firestorm raced downhill, consuming trees, homes, and entire streets in minutes. People had barely enough time to flee. Some left with just the clothes on their backs. Others never made it out. Paradise became a scene from a nightmare, cars jammed in gridlock as walls of fire closed in, skies turned black as night, and ash fell like snow. Gas stations exploded. Power lines cracked and hissed. The fire moved so fast that it burned an area the size of a football field every second.
Survivors later described it as hell on earth. A mother clutching her child as they drove through a tunnel of fire, praying out loud. A nurse evacuating hospital patients in her own car, not knowing if they'd make it. An elderly man who refused to leave his home and was never seen again. Firefighters arriving to neighborhoods that no longer existed. In the chaos, first responders became heroes, rescuing trapped families, driving through walls of flame, and refusing to rest while smoke choked the sky. Some worked for days without sleep. The stories were heartbreaking. The courage was unforgettable.
When the flames were finally contained weeks later, the scale of devastation was almost incomprehensible. 85 lives lost, many of them elderly and unable to escape. Over 18,000 structures destroyed, most of them homes. Paradise, nearly wiped off the map. The fire left behind a gray wasteland. Chimneys stood like gravestones. Burned-out cars lined roads that once led to schools and parks. The air smelled of smoke for weeks. The trauma would linger far longer. Tens of thousands were displaced. Entire families became homeless. Recovery was slow, painful, and filled with grief.
The cause of the Camp Fire was traced to electrical transmission lines owned by Pacific Gas and Electric, PG&E. Aging infrastructure, dry conditions, and powerful winds had created a perfect storm. PG&E would later accept responsibility, and file for bankruptcy due to the billions in claims. Lawsuits, investigations, and policy reforms followed, but for many, it felt too late. The fire wasn't just a natural disaster. It was a man-made failure, a catastrophe born from neglect, climate change, and a system stretched too thin.
And yet, from the ruins, the people of Paradise began to rebuild. Not just homes, but lives. Survivors started support groups. Volunteers came from across the country. Schools reopened in temporary buildings. Trees were replanted. Hope, fragile as it was, returned in small moments, a rebuilt front porch, a rescued pet reunited, a child laughing again. The campfire became a turning point. It forced new conversations about wildfire readiness, infrastructure responsibility, and climate resilience. The scars may never fully fade, but neither will the strength of the people who lived through it.
The campfire was more than a wildfire. It was a warning. A signal that the old ways of living with nature are no longer enough. That we must rethink how we build, how we prepare, and how we protect what matters most. For in a single day, a town was lost. But in the days that followed, a story of survival was born. And that story deserves to be told.